Hello, everybody. I'm Daniel Buisson, international schools publisher, and I'm here with Sandy Morale and Claire Medwell. Did I get that right?
You did.
Okay. First of all, can you tell us a bit about yourselves and how you got into English language teaching, and what inspired you to become course writers?
Okay. Want me to go first?
Okay, fire away.
So yes, what got me into English language teaching? Well, my first degree was art and drama, and I wanted to travel and see the world, and it was a ticket to ride, really, doing a CELTA. I landed in Portugal and fell in love, and so I had to take it seriously. So I went on and did an MA, and then later a PhD. But that's how I got into language teaching. But I got into teaching small children because I had children of my own, and I realised just how easily they were able to pick up the language. And being in the classroom and teaching a group of children once or twice a week is not the same as bringing up bilingual children, but you can do very similar things, and they're able to pick up language in a similar way. So that's really when I began teaching small children, so back in the early 90s.
Yeah, I have certainly my beginnings were quite similar. I've lived and worked in Madrid for the last 23 years. And I moved to Madrid after having graduated, quite recently after I graduated, to teach English. The idea being to travel the world as well. Exactly the same happened to me. I met my husband, who is from Madrid, and I'm still in Madrid or near Madrid to this very day. I began teaching at the International House in Madrid, first as an adults teacher, but then became a lot more involved in the Young Learners Department, which is when I realised that was the area I really wanted to teach in. So first in primary, and then became specialised more in pre-primary. And from there branched out into publishing, and an opportunity arose to write a sample for Cheeky Monkey, which was one of the forerunners of Dex. And that's how I began in the world of pre-primary.
Yeah, I didn't say how I began in the world of pre-primary,
Yes.
I suppose, with publishing anyway. How did I begin? I did some work for Oxford University Press. I think they must have seen some presentations that I'd done, and they asked me to write some activity books for one of the, I think it was Cookie and Friends. And then Paul Drury from Macmillan got in touch. He had seen me present in 2001, and this was, I think, 2006, so 5 years had gone by. And he said, "Oh, I saw you 5 years ago, and I'm wondering if you're free to write a course, or if you'd like to put in a sample." And that's how it all began, really. And I had actually had a sample because I had been asked to do something for another publisher, and I wasn't sure if that was going to work or not. And it was about a little teddy bear called Polly, based on a puppet which I used in the classroom. And I showed him this sample, and it turned into Best Buddies, which was my first course for Macmillan, Mexico, which is very exciting.
Speaking of puppets, we haven't
Yes.
introduced Dex.
Oh,
Here's Dex.
Dex.
He's the
Forgot
protagonist
about
of
you.
today.
Yes.
So you didn't actually travel the world, but you found your respective partners in
Yeah.
Portugal and in Spain.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to Dex. Let's talk a little about Discover with Dex. So who exactly is Dex, and what inspired the two of you to write this particular course?
Okay, I'll start with this one because Dex was first and foremost a monster when I was first asked to write the sample. And I was asked to write the course because I'd been involved in Captain Jack. And I proposed a sample based on Manny the Monster, which is still an idea which I would one day like to publish because I think it's a lovely idea. It was met with positive responses, but the Macmillan publishers decided that a monster wasn't a good idea. Then we moved into Chippy the Chipmunk. That didn't work either because it was like another course book's character. And then we had an alien.
We also had a squirrel.
We had a
Oh,
squirrel
the
at one
squirrel,
point.
that's right.
Okay. Okay. So, and this I think is also because it demonstrates just how long the process is and how detailed it is before you take on a character or the main character of the course. And we knew that we wanted something that could be born from an egg. And when Claire came on board as a consultant, we decided on the dinosaur character, and then just kind of grew from there, really. So he was, we wanted a name that began with D for dinosaur, and Dex just sort of came, and there he is, and he's done really well. I remember the first drawings I did of him, and they were not that dissimilar
No.
from what he looks like today.
Then again, you are an artist, Sandy.
Okay.
No, but it's interesting the experience that the fact that the children themselves, the main course characters, discover the egg in the garden, and then the children with Dex learn about the world around them.
Yes,
the name Discover.
That's
and they
grows
grow
with
with him. Which I think is a really nice part of the course. The fact that the children in the course are growing with Dex, as the children who do the course, who are there in the classroom, also grow with Dex.
Yeah,
so
and that Dex is part of the family, becomes it's almost like a little brother, really.
Yeah, he's lovely.
Yeah. Sometimes misbehaves, but he's behaving today.
Yes.
So Dex is aimed at pre-primary children, as we all know. So what's so special about teaching this age group?
I think it's a very, very special age group. I'm passionate about teaching this age group. Huge differences from primary age children. First, because they're so very, very young. It's their first encounter with something, kind of a education institution, so to speak. We were discussing earlier that in many countries it's not compulsory education, but places like Portugal, places like Spain, over 90% of the children will be starting education at the age of 3.
It's not compulsory yet.
But it's not compulsory, no. So what's special? They're very young. As we're English teachers, but we're not just teaching them linguistically at this age. We are looking at the whole child. They're having to become sociable within. They're learning how to socialise with other children. Emotionally, it'd be quite difficult for them initially, for many children in a classroom. Values, behaviour. It's a minefield, isn't it, Sandy?
Yes. And a lot of teachers, I think, don't realise that what they do will be supporting their development in so many ways. I'm very specific about maths at the moment. I'm really interested in how what we do supports the child's maths development. Just so a simple routine. We're talking about days of the week, for example, in Dex level 3, they learn about the days of the week. And the learning of the days of the week is about knowing that there are days in a week and there are 7 days in a week, and that there are weeks in a year. Or if we want to go further back, that there are hours in the day, that it's the days made of a morning and an afternoon. I mean, that children learn that by going over those things with their teachers. So we're reinforcing a lot of their general development in English, and I don't think teachers really take that seriously enough. We're not just teaching English. We are helping a child develop as a whole human being.
So for those teachers who are starting out in preschool, what advice would you give them?
To read, if they've got a course book, to read the teacher's guide. Because if it's a good course book, then it will have a really good teacher's guide, and it will help them enormously with the theories it'll help them enormously with how to teach that particular course and to make the most of the materials they're using. But another thing that I would say is, in Portugal and Spain in particular, it tends to be a specialist English teacher who comes in and teaches English, and then will leave the classroom and move around. And if that's the case, it's really important to collaborate with the classroom teacher and try and follow what she is doing and learn with her as well. Use some of the techniques that she uses to manage her children, and collaborate. I think that's really important. Anything that you want to add?
So I just think also a lot of we often, certainly in situations in Spain, a lot of these English language specialists are dropping down from higher levels. And I think they have certain preconceived ideas that it might be, they're just going to be younger children, but I'm sure it's going to be quite similar. I'm going to teach them linguistically, and they find themselves in a situation where they don't know how to organise young children. Something like Dex is very promotes routines in the classroom, which is essential to have a very solid framework to every class. so that children feel comfortable. It kind of scaffolds their learning and their behaviour, and they know what to expect. They know that they may have, when they come into the class, they have a hello time routine. They know they sit in a circle. They know they sing a song. They know they meet decks. Moving on to playtime, story time, tidy up routines. I think this really,
all
again,
the different times
helps
are very
guide the
evident.
children and kind of creates this kind of caring environment for them, I think.
A very, very clear framework of the lesson.
Absolutely,
And
yes,
I would
yeah.
say what I have learned developing the materials is exactly this, is one, to learn from the teachers of the preschool teachers who are teaching their mother tongue, observing what they do, because these children are very young, so learning from what they do in terms of the routines, the weather routine, the routines that you've just spoken about. It's really observing that. And for my advice to teachers would be really just sit and observe them and really respect in terms of what they're doing in L1. As we developed Dex, we thought about how the introduction of colours, the certain concepts that we do in L1 to ensure really respectful with colours, with the numbers and concepts like up and down and things, to ensure that it doesn't. Some teachers don't like the children to be doing things in L2 in English before they do an L1. So it's,
and we did take that into consideration.
so it's
and tried
something
to follow.
to follow,
I think
to
it's- I
ensure
think
it's
it is
that
important,
it's that flexibility as English teachers. We teach numbers, colours, toys, the different topics, but in preschool it's really important to ensure that you get the balance right.
How to do that in balance.
With the mother tongue. We could be on. We could talk about this for hours.
We did, it's a delightful topic.
And okay, so let's move on in terms of so what support does Dex offer for parents and for teachers from your point of view?
Well, the whole unit is created so that at the end of the unit, the children they can do a project which involves the parents as well. It doesn't involve the parents doing it. It involves the children showing what they've done in the class and then expanding on what they've done. That's a very important part of the project work. And they take that back into the classroom and they talk about it. So parents are involved there. They're involved in the children take the mini book home, for example, to retell or to tell their parents the story. They're given lots of opportunities to share what they know and what they can do with the parents. And then there's lots of support for teachers to share information with parents. So what are the children doing in each unit, welcome letters, how to assess children, or rather look at their progression. I prefer that to assessment, and sharing that with parents. And they also have a really nice part on the website where they can look at different materials and they can do little online games with the children as well, I think.
And the song CD as well.
Oh, yes,
again, that's something they take home with the
absolutely.
song that they
so they can share the songs with their parents.
sing with their parents as well.
In the car.
In the car, or in the kitchen when they're having breakfast, in the bath and having a bath. Yeah, lots of those things. For the teachers, well, I'm one of the things that I think is fantastic. I'm really proud that Macmillan took that step, was to create a rather different teacher's guide, which supports teachers who are confident, and it gives them just very brief steps of what they can do on one page. And then there's a more detailed support step-by-step lesson for teachers who don't feel quite so confident. And I think, and it's also in colour, and I know that might seem a bit sort of, well, so what, but it actually makes a huge difference because you highlight different parts of the lesson. And I think that Macmillan did brilliantly to have brought this, for Macmillan this was an innovation. And I think it's a really useful one. I know that it wasn't easy to do because we had to separate exactly and make things very clear, and also reduce what we were trying to say as course book writers, because a course book writer who writes for pre-primary, there's nothing in the course book except pictures. So our job is writing the teacher's guide. And so taking that so we write a teacher's guide, and then it had to be sort of transformed into this format. So that was an interesting experience, but I think it was it worked. But it's I think that it's very staged. One of the things which I found when I'm no longer in the classroom every day, but as a teacher I found it very important to stage my lessons, and we've brought that into the course. And I think that's very clear in the teachers' notes as well. And I hope that is one of the elements which the teachers find in one of the parts of the course which the teachers find very supportive. What you would add to that?
No, I agree. I think the kind of materials that Macmillan produce now in pre-primary are really cater for all the possible needs they can of their pre-primary teachers. I think in terms of resources, DEX is a very, very complete course with, it's not just decks, there's a wall hanging, there are flashcards, there are story cards. The story cards as well with the questions you can ask the children on the back, just questions. There are certain things which suddenly come to mind. There are so many elements.
And of course there's a digital part which can support the teacher as well.
Of course, yeah.
Yes. So
just what you mentioned, that you said the teacher's book was innovative. So that's how we say the word. How do you feel? What other aspects of DEX that makes it innovative?
Well, this might sound a bit silly, but I think that we're really focusing on listening and speaking, and I hope that has made it clear that I know that that's what we should be doing with pre-primary anyway, but we've really tried to help teachers honestly do listening and speaking before anything else, and to do it properly. And I think that's actually why we won the ESU award in November, because it was about promoting oracy, and that's what we did at DEX, is really does support listening and speaking in the classroom. And all the activities are based on getting children to use English meaningfully and to feel confident about that. And so we're encouraging teachers to do a lot of repetition, but repetition in different ways with language. And we've given them the tools to do that with all the different games that we use, all the different activities, the songs, the chants.
Just thinking
rhymes.
as well, the
functional
language, where we brought in those very, very simple. You brought in the very, very simple dialogues which children can practice, which come from the story. They've been again, it's meaningful repetition in different ways, different manners of doing it.
For me, that's what's innovative, I think, and I would also like to highlight the projects. I've already mentioned them, but I did an awful lot of research for the projects, and I think that project work is not just going home and coming in with stuff. It's supporting children to do things in the classroom, to use language they already know, but then expand that language, and so it's classroom based, but then it has to leave the classroom to expand it even more and then come back. And we've got some, I mean, my favourite one is the Bones project, which so the children know the parts of the body, and learn that they have what bones are, and they feel the bones in their hands, and they look at x-rays and see what's inside, and then they recreate their hand using pasta or whatever. And another thing I think is very important is that we shouldn't say everyone has to do a pasta hand. Some children might want to make a hand out of Lego, or some children might want to paint a hand or print a hand, and so they should be given those opportunities, and we're encouraging that in the classroom. I know a lot of teachers shy away from those kinds of activities, but they are there for those teachers that don't, and I think that's important.
And making them become, sort of, by doing that, making them become, even though they're so young, more autonomous, becoming more independent. Things about the projects as well, it's getting young children to work in a team, which I think most teachers will shy away from, because they're too young, they can't manage with that. But it's not, we're laying the foundations for them to be able to do that, and I think that's very important.
Yes, the measuring, that's another lovely one. They have to draw around their, I really enjoyed that one as well. They have to draw around their feet and cut it out, and then they work in pairs and use the feet to measure tables, to measure carpets and things like that, and doors. And then they go home and they do the same at home, and then they come in and say what they've measured at home. It's really nice.
Lovely.
And,
lovely. So where do you see infant and primary English going in the next few years?
Who would like to
The $1 million question.
The $1 million question.
We were having a discussion about that actually as we were practicing for this, and the idea of the digital aspect. And I mean, I'm not a digital person myself, but I do recognise the fact that children are very digital at home. So there will always be a digital component, but I really hope that does not overtake. The children need to engage, they need to do things, and it needs to be away from a screen. So
as well.
so teachers need to be very aware of that, and the lessons should not be based on showing images on the screen and just getting children to chant and repeat. They should be actively, moving and doing things. And I hope that we will see more and more of that when, as teachers become more aware of the importance of developing the whole child and not just looking at teaching English. So I hope that that is what happens in the future. Although I'm not sure, there's very little policy to support it because pre-primary education is not compulsory in the world, in most countries in the world. What happens in English in pre-primary is often has no policy to support it, and so all sorts of terrible things happen, and that's not good. So I hope that in the future we see more policy that helps to organise and orient. Orient, is that an English word?
Orientate, yeah.
Orientate, thank you very much. My Portuguese coming in.
Portuguese and Spanish.
I hope that we see more guidelines, more solid guidelines based on research and good practice for how we can teach English appropriately in the pre-primary classroom.
Yeah, I agree. I think also as it's my own personal opinion, but I think that kind of the learning at this level as well, perhaps it needs to become more flexible. It may be that they become things like projects where from that or skills based. You might have a skill based pack or a skill. I just feel the idea that this kind of a story based pack, this kind of flexibility within pre-primary. I'm not sure whether that is something that might happen in the future or not, but it may not be the traditional
course book.
A course book, perhaps.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Just in terms of education, but obviously then the learning aspect as well. Policies as well, quite rightly, things needs to be more research.
Absolutely.
And more guidelines.
There's very little
on this on pre-primary education. Yeah.
Yes.
So what's next up for the two of you? Another $1 million question.
You tell us, Daniel.
It's in my hands.
I'm doing a lot of work with consultancies. I've moved away from writing particularly for a publisher, and I'm doing a lot of teacher education, teacher training and consulting work in different countries in the world related to pre-primary education, where policies are beginning to be introduced, which is fantastic to see. So yes, writing another course, I'm not sure. I haven't been asked by a publisher yet. Well, no, that's not true. I have, but I've not been able to accept any proposals. But it's always an interesting experience to write a course book. And I think in each one you learn a huge amount, which will make the next one, if there is one, a better project. So yeah.
I mean, I'm a similar situation to Sandy. There's a big demand at the moment for pre-primary training throughout the world. It's an area which is opening up in other markets as well. So that's where a lot of my time's being spent at the moment. But again, becoming involved in another project is something I'd always like to do. Again, learn an awful lot from it. Speaking to teachers from around the world as well, you kind of all these ideas feed in to a new pre-primary project. I
just want to thank you
for
your time, and thank you so much for working on Dex.
Yes,
thank you.
It was a pleasure.
I think as we were a great team.
I think we were too.
Yes, I think so too. Thank you, Dex.